Okay, so we'll just begin with our Anandamayi chant. Anandamayi Chaitanyamayi Satyamayi Parame Anandamayi Chaitanyamayi Satyamayi Parame Satyamayi Parame Satyamayi Parame. So we just finished with Ganesh Visarjan yesterday, and Lord Ganesh has always been very special to the mother. So we'll begin with a little story. Some of you probably know it, but this is for those of you who don't. Sorry, I don't understand. So this is mother's first encounter with Lord Ganesh. You see, this is mother's mother talking. This is how it happened. We had a meditation. This was more than 30 years ago in the room where prosperity is now distributed. There were 8 or 10 of us, I believe. We used to make sentences with flowers. I arranged the flowers, and each one made a sentence with the different flowers I had put there. And one day, when the subject of prosperity or wealth came up, I thought, they always say that Ganesh is the god of money, of fortune, of the world's wealth. I thought, isn't this whole story of the god with an elephant trunk merely a lot of human imagination? Thereupon we meditated, and who should I see walk in and park himself in front of me but a living being, absolutely alive and luminous, with a trunk that long and smiling. So then in my meditations, I said, so it's true that you exist. Of course I exist. And you may ask me for whatever you wish from a monetary standpoint. Of course, and I will give it to you. So I asked, and for about 10 years, it poured like this gesture of torrents. It was incredible. I would ask, and at the next darshan or a month or several days later, depending, there it was. So I have a very interesting story to share. Happened, I think, just yesterday. A young student of mine. So he was on his bike, and his bike suddenly stopped. He was at Marine Drive, closer to the Nariman Point, and his bike suddenly stopped. And he didn't want to just leave it there, so he was pushing it along. He lives near Kemp's Corner, so it would be quite a task to push it all the way there. So he was pushing it, and then he has quite a strong bond with mother. So he asked her, Mother, why did this happen? There's a reason for everything. And he heard her telling him from inside, it's because you didn't visit my son Ganesh this time. So every year he makes it a point to go and visit at least one Ganesh idol. This year he got caught up and the typical rational thinking that, I can just pray in my mind. I don't need to go anywhere. And he felt mother was telling him from within, don't be arrogant, be humble and pay my son a visit. So he was wondering how he'll do that. And suddenly a Swiggy guy came along wearing orange. Orange is the color of Lord Ganesha. and helped him to chug his bike along with his own bike, and they reached Chowpatty. And he saw many Ganeshas being put into the sea. And he said, okay, so I do get to meet Ganesha. And he just prayed to him. And the moment he prayed to him and he tried to start his bike started. So the Swiggy guy saying, ye kaise hua? So he was like, I just had to see Bappa and the bike started. So quite a sweet story how mother works in these different ways. Okay, so we come to the topic for today, loving surrender. So important, this is the keynote of Sri Aurobindo's yoga, where he says, it is not by his own strength or good qualities that anyone can attain the divine change. There are only two things that matter, the mother's force at work and the sadhak's will to open to it and trust in her working. Keep your will and your trust and care nothing for the rest are only difficulties that all meet in their sadhana. So Sri Aurobindo often says that the aim of his integral yoga, the transformation of the human nature, is something so huge in magnitude that however capable a human being is, it cannot be done by his own capacity. He has to open himself, receive the mother's force, and let the mother's force work. So the yoga progresses not in proportion to our capacity, but in proportion to our receptivity, to our surrender, to how much two things that matter, the mother's force at work and the sadhak's will to open to it and trust in her working. This is the key word. Our will to open to her force and to trust in her working. If we keep saying, I will do, like this boy yesterday, he tried so hard and he's very good with machines. He tried so hard to get the machine, this bike working. But the moment he opened to mother and received her guidance and did what she told him to, in seconds his bike started. So only two things that matter, the mother's force at work and the sadhak's will to open to it and trust in her working. Keep your will and your trust and care nothing for the rest are only difficulties that all meet in their sadhana.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah.
Ma'am, sometimes, there are people close to your friends who are going through a troubled phase, and you want to introduce these things to them, but they are not open. They have a lot of doubts. So how do you how do you help them, or, how do you make them see these things? Can anything be done or no?
Param, you can pray to the mother for them, and that lovely thing, you just see mother high up in the ceiling, two shafts of golden light, one coming into you, one coming into your friend. For 24 breaths, inhale, look up at the image, exhale, two shafts coming down. And then leave it at that, because what you can't do with words, mother can work on them. And most important, see, mother is, we think she's a form, but she's really a vibration. And she says, I'm a very contagious vibration. So if you are really feeling her inside you, you don't have to speak of her. When you're with that person, somewhere along the line, the person will catch the vibration depending on their receptivity. You can speak the minimum, but then you just leave it because then it's between mother and them. And they say, no, those who call to infinity are first called by infinity. We can't interfere with that. It's up to mother to call them.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
But don't give up, Param. I don't mean to discourage your ambition to bring people to the path. It's not that we are propagandists, but if we've tasted something very beautiful, it's but natural that we want to give people we care about a taste of that. So don't give up that aspiration, but sometimes the more you talk about it and they are not ready, the more they'll resist it. So then it's best not to talk about it.
Ma'am, on this subject, can I ask you what exactly does it mean when the student is ready, the master arrives?
Exactly that you have to be ready. Exactly what I said. Those who call to infinity are first called by infinity. So you have to be ready. See, in my case, I was searching many years ago. I started with Buddhism. And at that time, a colleague of mine gave me a book of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and I read it and I said, what is all this supramental yoga and all? It's not for me. And I returned the book. And 10 years later, I went through whatever experience I did. And it just took a picture of Mother to bring me to her. Probably I wasn't ready for her 10 years ago. Yeah.
Right. So that way, that's why even for another person, we can't, there's very little that we can do.
We pray for them and we can see if your natural state is to be connected to the Mother. No, could we? It will just spread to people around you in a way that they can't understand and you can't understand. They'll sense her in your being and be attracted to her.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat some passages from yoga and its objects because that particular recording didn't come. And I think these lines are too important to not listen to them again and again. You don't have a recording to listen to it, so I revisited it. The first process of the yoga is to make the sankalp of Atma Samarpan, complete surrender. Put yourself with all your heart and all your strength into God's hands. Make no conditions. Ask for nothing, not even for Siddhi in yoga, for nothing at all except that in you and through you his will may be directly performed. So beautiful. Each line you need to really read again and again. Put yourself with all your heart and all your strength into God's hands. Make no conditions. Ask for nothing. Not even for Siddhi in the yoga, for nothing at all, except that in you and through you his will may be directly performed. To those who demand from him, God gives what they demand. But to those who give themselves and demand nothing, he gives everything that they might otherwise have asked or needed. And in addition, he gives himself and the spontaneous boons of his love. So our first relationship with God is through prayer. But as Sai Baba once said, I give people what they want so that in time to come, they will want what I want to give them. So once we pray and our prayers are answered, we start believing. The belief changes to love. Love paves the way for surrender, where I just give myself to God and say that let your will be done. My mental will is limited. What I'll ask for will also be limited. But I'm giving myself to you with abandon. Let your will be done in me. If this attitude of perfect self-surrender can even be imperfectly established, look at his wisdom. He knows That perfect self-surrender for an ordinary human being is difficult, but even if we imperfectly establish it, all necessity of yogic kriya inevitably ceases. For then God himself in us becomes the sadhak and the siddha, and his divine power works in us not by artificial processes, but by a working of nature which is perfectly informed, all-searching, and infallibly efficient. So when we surrender to God, when we just say this has to be done, I'm not asking for this outcome, but I'm putting myself in your hands, use me as an instrument and do whatever is necessary, then God himself becomes the sadhak and siddha in us. And his divine power works in us not by artificial processes of even asana pranayam, but by a working of nature which is perfectly informed, all searching, and infallibly efficient. Even the most powerful Rajyogic samyama is a very powerful concentration, the most developed pranayam, the most strenuous meditation, the most ecstatic bhakti, the most self-denying action, mighty as they are and efficacious, are comparatively weak in their results when set beside the supreme working. For those are all limited to a certain extent by our capacity. But this is illimitable. So our capacity to do asana, pranayam, meditate, concentrate, that's a limitation on the result. But when we open to Mother and let her force work in us, her force is illimitable in potency because it's God's capacity. It is only limited by his will, which knows what is best for the world and for each of us in the world and apart from it. So the first process in his yoga is Atma Samarpan, to surrender to Mother. Surrender means I completely trust that nothing happens in my life without your sanction, and your sanction only works for my highest good. So I'm not interfering, I'm not desiring. Difficult to reach that stage, but at least keep it as an ideal. I'm not getting excited over this outcome or that outcome or disappointed over it. Whatever is happening to me is happening by your will, and I'm in surrender to it. The most beautiful example of this surrender was that aeroplane story. I've visited it many times. But just that person who, after meeting the mother, was flying back from Chennai and his plane was about to crash. But he was in such a state of surrender to Mother after meeting her that he thought of the Mother instantly, but not with a prayer that please save me, please don't let the plane crash. It was complete surrender. He told her in his mind that I've seen you once, Ma. Now I know that if I die, I'll be safe in my death. If I live, I'll be safe in my living. That's surrender, where you don't choose an outcome, where you just know that wherever you'll be taken, you'll be fine. And he made that surrender to the Mother, and the plane settled. He wrote to the Mother, and the Mother was in her body, and when her secretary was handing him this person's letter, she's supposed to have said, oh yes, I know this person, his plane was destined to crash, but his surrender to me was so complete that my force could act fully and change the collective karma of everyone on the flight. Now, if he had prayed to her, Mother save me, of course she would have answered, but her force would be limited by his demand. But when he's not making any demand, when he's just saying, and actually not stoically resigned, but full of love, therefore the title of this talk is Loving Surrender. If I can actually make that loving surrender, that you know best, whatever you take me to, it will be for my highest good, then her force can work fully. That's what we said. In yoga, two things are necessary. Mother's force, which is always available for her children, but how much does the child open to her and receive it? And that receptivity grows with the progressive surrender in our being. So Atma Samarpan is the first. The next process is to stand aside, second process, and watch the working of the divine power in yourself. This working is often attended with disturbance and trouble in the system. Therefore, faith is necessary. So Mother's force is really the most powerful cleansing force in the world. When you open to it, it's going to go deep into your subconscious and pull out everything that needs to be pulled out. And sometimes when it comes to the surface, it can create disturbance and trouble in the system. Therefore, faith is necessary. Though perfect faith is not always possible at once. For whatever impurity is in you, harbored openly or secretly lurking, is likely to rise at first and be repeated so long as it is not exhaustively swept out. And doubt in this age is almost universal impurity. But even when the doubt assails, stand by and wait for it to pass, availing yourself, if possible, of the satsang of those who are already advanced on the path. But when that is absent, still holding fast to the principle of yoga, self-surrender. When distressed within or assailed from without, when you're unhappy inside or there are problems on the outside, remember the words of the Gita, Sarva Dharman Parityajya. Abandon all dharma, all law, rule, means, and codes of every kind, whether formed by previous habit and belief or imposed from outside, and take refuge in me alone. I will deliver thee from all sin and evil. Do not grieve. I will deliver you. You have not to be troubled or struggle yourself as if the responsibility were yours or the result depended on your efforts. A mightier than you is busy with the matter. Neither disease nor calamity nor the rising of sin and impurity in you should cause any alarm. We get very disturbed when we get thoughts or feelings which we feel are wrong, bad, sinful. But Sri Aurobindo is bidding us that do not be disturbed from any calamity or disease, ill health, or the rising of sin or impurity in you. Hold fast only to him. I will deliver thee from all sin and evil. But release does not come by a sudden miracle. It comes by a process of purification. And these things are a part of the process. They are like the dust that rises in clouds when a room long uncleaned is at last swept out. Though the dust seem to choke you, yet persevere. Ma Shuja, do not grieve. So, he bids us first thing, Atma Samarpan, self-surrender. Second, he says, stand aside and watch her force working in you. And most of us may not know what it means. So, for example, suppose doubt comes. I get all tied up in knots. What kind of a devotee or child of the mother am I? Why do I doubt? Why am I not more sincere? Blah, blah, blah. But Sri Aurobindo says, don't do that. Just surrender the doubt to the mother. Tell her, mother, I'm feeling this. I can't do anything about it, but I'm sincerely offering it to you. You do what you can. And then you sincerely give up all efforts to change it. You just become the witness and watch. And you will see how her force works to clear the doubt. Now here he's clarifying how to stand aside. In order to stand aside, you must know yourself as the Purusha who merely watches, consents to God's work, holds up the Aadhar and enjoys the fruits that God gives. The work itself is done by God as Shakti, by Kali, and is offered up by her as a yajna to Sri Krishna. You are the Yajaman who sees the sacrifice done, whose presence is necessary to every movement of the sacrifice and who tastes its results. The separation of yourself, this renunciation of the Kartritva Abhiman, the idea of yourself as the doer, is easier if you know what the Aadhar is. About the Buddhi, which is the highest function of the mind, is the higher Buddhi or Vigyan, the seat of the Satya Dharma, truth of knowledge, truth of bhava, truth of action. And about this ideal faculty is the Ananda, or cosmic bliss in which the divine part of you dwells. It is of this Vigyan and this Ananda that Christ spoke as the kingdom of God that is within you. We at present are awake, Jagrat, in the lower movements, but Sushupta, fast asleep in the Vigyan and Ananda. If we have to awaken these levels of consciousness within us, and their awakening and unmixed activity is the siddhi of the yoga, for when that happens, we gain the condition of being which is called in the Gita dwelling in God, of which Sri Krishna speaks when he says, Mai nivas sishya sebhyava, verily thou shalt dwell in me. Once again it is gained, once it is gained, we are free and blessed to have everything that we desire. So, let's just go into this a little more experientially. So sit tall. Shut your eyes. And just bring your awareness to the top of your head. Feel as if the top of your head is a flower opening to the sun of Mother's presence overhead. Beautiful line in Savitri. She is the sun from which we kindle all our suns. So just feel the top of your head opening to receive her force, not with effort, just with surrender. Do nothing. Just stay stationed overhead in the poise of the top of the head, opening like a flower to the sun of her presence. And then just watch the Prakriti, the nature flowing through you, thoughts, emotions, body sensations, all these are Prakriti. Whenever you see a particular way of your nature manifesting, give up the impulse to change it, to resist it, or to exult in it. This is not you, this is Prakriti. Just step back and watch Mother's force acting on it. You can open your eyes and continue to do this. Open your eyes slightly so you build a bridge with the higher consciousness in the waking state. See if you can feel that presence above your head even now. No desire to feel it. The sun is there. the flower has to open to it. So you just open the top of your head like a flower to the sun. And that stance of Atma Samarpan, not grabbing the sunlight, just giving yourself to the sunlight, to the sun of a presence, like a flower gives itself. No demand, no desire, just a simple self-giving. Shut your eyes again and continue with this. Watching nature flow through you, stepping aside from it, and just watching Mother's force working with nature rather than you grappling with it. Your grapple has limited capacity, but Mother is infinite, and her force to deal with it is also infinite. Open your eyes. And try and stay poised above the head as we continue. The third process, so far in yoga and its object, Sri Aurobindo has outlined two processes: Atma Samarpan, self-surrender, and stepping aside and watching Mother's force working on the nature. The third process, he says, is to perceive all things as God. Yeah? So this is a passage from Synthesis of Yoga. Inwardly, the image of the beloved has become visible to the eye within, dwelling in us as in his mansion, informing our hearts with the sweetness of his presence, presiding over all our activities of mind and life as the friend, master, and lover from the summit of our being, uniting us from above with himself in the universe. So he's saying, if we are used to seeing an image of Mother, whoever in our heart, that image has to become visible to the eye within, dwelling in us as in his mansion, informing our hearts with the sweetness of his presence, presiding over all our activities of mind and life as the friend, master, and lover from the summit of our being, uniting us from above with himself in the universe. A constant inner communion is the joy to be made close and permanent and unfailing. This communion is not to be confined to an exceptional nearness and adoration when we retire quite into ourselves away from our normal preoccupations, nor is it to be sought by a putting away of our human activities. All our thoughts, impulses, feelings, actions have to be referred to him for his sanction or disallowance, Or if we cannot yet reach this point, to be offered to him in our sacrifice of aspiration, so that he may more and more descend into us and be present in them all, and pervade them with all his will and power, his light and knowledge, his love and delight. In the end, all our thoughts, feelings, impulses, actions will begin to proceed from him and change into some divine seed and form of themselves. In our whole inner living, we shall have grown conscious of ourselves as a part of his being, till between the existence of the divine whom we adore and our own lives, there is no longer any division. Shut your eyes, see if you can still connect with the overhead space. If you could stay connected there as I read this, see what you feel. So too, in all happenings, we have to come to see the dealings with us of the divine lover and take such pleasure in them that even grief and suffering and physical pain become his gifts and turn to delight. Very challenging, but if we have to see God in everything, we have to see God even in our grief and physical pain. Slain by the sense of the divine contact. I'll just be back. Physical pain become his gifts and turn to delight, and disappear finally into delight, slain by the sense of the divine contact, because the touch of his hands is the alchemist of a miraculous transformation. Some reject life because it is tainted with grief and pain. But to the God lover, grief and pain become means of meeting with him. Imprints of his pressure, grief and pain are nothing but imprints of his pressure, and finally cease as soon as your union with his nature becomes too complete for these masks of the universal delight. So grief and pain are just masks of the universal delight, at all to conceal it. They change into the Ananda. So in all happenings, not only in all animate and inanimate things, in every happening, we have to see it as a movement of the Lord. So now we come to lines from Savitri. This is God, the Godhead speaking to Savitri. Even my desires clutch shall be to thee the ordeal of my rapture's contrary shape. Even my disasters clutch, what goes wrong, you will see it as my rapture's opposite shape. In pain's self shall smile on thee my secret face. In every pain, you will see my face and you won't see it as pain any longer. Thou shalt bear my ruthless beauty unabridged amid the world's intolerable wrongs. For me, everything in the world will be my beauty unabridged, unedited, even in all the world's intolerable wrongs, trampled by the violent misdeeds of time. Cry out to the ecstasy of my rapture's touch. All being shall be to thy life my emissaries, my messengers. All beings will be in your life my messengers. Drawn to me on the bosom of thy friend, compelled to meet me in thy enemy's eyes. You will be drawn to me in the heart of your friend, and you will be compelled to meet me in your enemy's eyes. So beautiful. You'll call somebody your enemy, but you'll see mother smiling in that person's eyes, and it'll compel you to see her there. So that celebrated line of Sri Aurobindo's, my rival's downfall is my own disgrace. I look at my enemy and see Krishna's face. My creatures shall demand me from thy heart. So once you're so given to me, all my creatures, all being will demand me from your heart. Help, thou shalt not shrink from any brother soul. In that state, any human being, you cannot feel recoil from them. There's a beautiful shloka in the Isha Upanishad, which says that one who sees Brahma or God everywhere, what recoil can he ever have, or what fear can he have of anyone else? So thou shalt not shrink from any brother's soul. Thou shalt be attracted helplessly to all. Men seeing thee shall feel my hands of joy. Param, this answers your question. When you're so one with the mother, no, you don't have to do anything. Just being with you, somehow they'll catch her vibration by contagion. Men seeing thee shall feel my hands of joy. In sorrow's pangs, feel the steps of the world's delight. Their life experience, its tumultuous shock in the mutual craving of two opposites. Just shut your eyes or keep your eyes open, try and feel that presence overhead, and I'll read this passage without explanation. Even my disaster's clutch shall be to thee the ordeal of my rapture's contrary shape. In pain self shall smile on thee, my secret face. Thou shalt bear my ruthless beauty unabridged amid the rubble's intolerable wrongs, trampled by the violent misdeeds of time. Cry out to the ecstasy of my rapture's touch. All being shall be to thy life my emissaries. Drawn to me on the bosom of thy friend, compelled to meet me in thy enemy's eyes, my creature shall demand me from thy heart. Thou shalt not shrink from any brother's soul. Thou shalt be helplessly attracted to all. Men seeing thee shall feel my hands of joy. In sorrow's pangs feel steps of the world's delight. Thy life experience its tumultuous shock in the mutual craving of two opposites. Further in Savitri, this is the Godhead speaking to Savitri, who hunts and seizes me, my captive grows. Such a beautiful play of words. God is my prey, I'm hunting him. But when I find the prey, the prey becomes my master. Who hunts and seizes me, my captive grows. This shalt thou henceforth learn from thy heartbeats. Forever love, O beautiful slave of God. So somewhere he writes in Savitri that freest when most enslaved. When I'm most enslaved by God, when I don't have any will of my own, and I'm just a slave to his will, then I'm the freest. Who hunts and seizes me, my captive grows. This shalt thou henceforth learn from thy heartbeats. Forever love, O beautiful slave of God. O lasso of my rapture's widening noose. A lasso we use it to ensnare an animal. It's a rope with a loop, and you put that loop around the neck of the animal. So here he's saying this rope is God's rope, and the noose, the lasso, the noose is the ring which you put around people. So each of us, when we are in this state, we become God's rod by which he ensnares more and more souls into his arm. O lasso of my, I hope this metaphor is clear. O lasso of my raptures, widening noose. So each person who is such a slave of God is the lasso of God's raptures, widening noose. The noose is growing wider and more wider to ensnare more and more people into it. Forever love, O beautiful slave of God, O lasso of my raptures, widening noose, become my cord of universal love, the spirit ensnared by thee, forced to delight of creation's oneness, sweet and fathomless, compelled to embrace my myriad unities and all my endless forms and divine souls. O mind, grow full of eternal peace. That's God's blessing to humanity. O mind, grow full of the eternal peace. O word, cry out the immortal litany, the immortal song. Built is the golden tower that connects earth to the heaven, earth to the spirit. The flame child is the psychic being, the child of Agni, the flame child born. So let's again concentrate in the heart or overhead and listen to these words. Who hunts and seizes me, my captive grows. This shalt thou henceforth learn from thy heartbeats. Forever love, O beautiful slave of God, O lasso of my raptures and widening noose, become my cord of universal love, the spirit ensnared by thee, forced to delight of creation's oneness, sweet and fathomless, compelled to embrace my myriad unities and all my endless forms and divine souls. O mind, grow full of the eternal peace. O word, cry out the immortal litany. Built is the golden tower, the flame child born. So we stop here. Do you have any questions I can address? So let's just summarize the talk for ourselves so we can be with it. Shut your eyes. And let's just focus on what Sri Aurobindo says. He says that his integral yoga is such a task, the transformation of our whole nature, that we cannot do it by human effort alone. It happens when we open to a higher force. He says for his yoga to happen, two things are necessary: the action of the mother's force with its light, and on the sadhak's part, a receptivity, an openness to the mother's light and force. What paves the way for this receptivity? Receptivity is paid for by surrender. Surrender means you just trust with every fiber of your being that nothing happens in your life without the mother's will and her sanction. And if it is so, I accept everything that happens smilingly with the thought, you've put this on my plate. I drop resistance. Let me see where you're taking me through this movement. And I have the Kalyan Shraddha, the constant faith within me that you're only going to take me to a good place. And this is without exception. And with that, I surrender. Atma Samarpan, the first step. So with your eyes shut, focus on the top of your head. Feel or visualize Mother's presence of the sun over your head. Open the top of your head to the sun like a flower without demand, without desire, giving up to worship and just giving yourself through the top of the head like a flower gives itself to the sun. It may help to bring Mother's image overhead. And just see what you feel, her force acting above your head. And do nothing. Just stay stationed, feeling this force. Second step, Sri Aurobindo says, is to stand apart and watch her working in you. So, you'll notice various tides of nature rising and passing away as thoughts, emotions, body sensation. You do nothing with them. You just offer them to Mother, stand apart and watch how she works on them without questions. And when her force works, sometimes lots of things come to the surface which create disturbance. But Sri Aurobindo instructs us, do not grieve when you see the rising of impurity and what you call sin. He reminds us of Krishna's promise to his devotee in the Gita that one who adores me cannot perish. Ma Shucha, do not grieve. Watch it and offer it to her. Third step, he says, is to see everything as God. All arisings in me, all doubt, all revolt, they are movements of God. God working on my nature through Prakriti. So I don't resist. I just surrender and open to the Mother for her to work on them. And beautiful lines from Savitri, where he says that one who really surrenders to him becomes his slave. So these lines, who hunts and seizes me, my captive grows. This shalt thou henceforth learn from thy heartbeats. Forever love, O beautiful slave of God, O lasso of my raptures, widening noose, become my cord of universal love, the spirit ensnared by thee, forced to delight, of creation's oneness, sweet and fathomless, compelled to embrace my myriad unities and all my endless forms and divine souls. O mind, grow full of eternal peace. O word, cry out the immortal litany. Built is the golden tower, the flame child is born.